Private property is a legal designation of the ownership of property by non-governmental legal entities. Private property is distinguishable from public property, which is owned by a state entity, and collective property, which is owned by a group of non-governmental entities. Private property is further distinguished from personal property, which refers to property for personal use and consumption. Categorization of collective property can be indeterminable, such as in a not-for-profit private university, or determinable, such as in the case of a legal partnership. History: prior to the 18th century, English speakers generally used the word property in reference to land ownership. In England, property did not have a legal definition until the 17th century. The issue of the enclosure of agricultural land in England, especially as debated in the 17th and 18th centuries, accompanied efforts in philosophy and political thought, by Thomas Hobbes, James Harrington, and John Locke, for example, to address the phenomenon of property ownership. In the 19th century, the economist and philosopher Karl Marx provided an influential analysis on the history and development of private property. In Marx's definition, private property refers to ownership of productive assets, termed the means of production, by a small class of owners who subsist on the value generated by the means of production. In a capitalist economy, the surplus value takes the form of profit, enabling a small class to subsist on the resulting property income. This conception of private property has proven influential for many subsequent socialist political movements and economic theories. Economic perspectives: liberal perspectives. Economic liberals consider private property to be essential for the construction of a prosperous society. They believe private ownership of land ensures the land will be put to productive use and its value protected by the landowner. If the owners must pay property taxes, this forces the owners to maintain a productive output from the land to keep taxes current. Private property also attaches a monetary value to land, which can be used to trade or as collateral. Private property thus is an important part of capitalization within the economy. Austrian school perspective: Austrian school economists Ludwig von Mises and Friedrich August Hayek argued that private property rights are a requisite for what they called rational economic calculation, and that the prices of goods and services cannot be determined accurately enough to make efficient economic calculation without having clearly defined private property rights. Socialist perspectives: Socialists generally view private property relations as limiting the potential of the productive forces in the economy. From this perspective, private property becomes obsolete when it concentrates into centralized, socialized institutions based on private appropriation of revenue until the role of the capitalist becomes redundant. With largely reduced capital accumulation from the original class of owners, private property in the means of production is to be replaced with a free association based on public or common ownership of socialized assets. In Marxian economics and socialist politics, there is distinction between private property and personal property. The former is defined as the means of production in reference to private ownership over an economic enterprise based on socialized production and wage labor. The latter is defined as consumer goods or goods produced by an individual. Prior to the 18th century, private property usually referred to land ownership. When Marx called for the abolition of private property, he was not referring to privately owned personal property such as clothing and furniture that was not used to produce the social wealth, but to productive property. Personal property versus means of production: there is some connection between personal property and means of production. Personal property is considered private property that is movable, as almost an extension of one's person, and does include property from which one has the right to exclude others. These objects can range from CDs to houses, depending on one's perspective, but definitions tend to include personal items such as clothing, books, food, or records. However, where personal property explicitly differs from private property is in its productive capacity. Not all forms of personal property have productive capacity, whereas private property like land and machines might have some productive capacity. From the socialist perspective, private property refers to capital or means of production that is owned by a business or few individuals and operated for their profit. As mentioned above, personal property refers to tangible items and possessions individuals own. When socialists speak of the abolition of private property, they are not referring to the abolition of personal property and possessions, but to private property in socialized means of production and value-producing assets. See also, common ownership, enclosure, personal property, public property, property income, rule of law, notes.